Thanks for joining us on The World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will take very strong action against Iran if it executes protesters, as rights groups claim that more than 2,400 anti-government demonstrators have been killed. The United Nations urges Iranian authorities to end violent repression and calls for accountability. Plus, what's the future of the world's biggest island, Greenland, as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance hosts Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers? The World Today starts right now. We begin with U.S. President Donald Trump's warning to Iran that there will be very strong action if it goes ahead with executions linked to the ongoing anti-government protests. Rights groups claim that more than 2,400 protesters have already been killed in the crackdown. One case that's drawing attention is 26-year-old Irfan Soltani. His family says he was sentenced to death just 2 days after being detained. Observers believe that such rapid trials are almost unprecedented, and with the internet largely shut down in Iran, there are fears these executions could happen without warning. While Iranian authorities blaming terrorists for the unrest, Washington says it's monitoring the situation closely and international pressure is mounting as the world watches what happens next in Tehran. In the meantime, the United States says it's reducing the number of personnel at its Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a move officials are calling a precautionary measure. Qatari authorities say the decision comes in response to rising regional tensions following President Donald Trump's warning that the U.S. will take very strong action if Iran executes anti-government protesters. Iran, in turn, has threatened retaliation if attacked. Rights groups say more than 2,400 demonstrators have been killed already in a violent crackdown across the country, raising concerns about escalating tensions in the region. Meanwhile, the United Nations has called on Iranian authorities to end the violent crackdown on protesters and ensure accountability. UN human rights spokesperson Jeremy Lawrence said today that the level of force used against demonstrators is horrifying, with hundreds reportedly killed and thousands arrested. He condemns the labeling of protesters as terrorists to justify violence and urged Iran to immediately halt all forms of repression while restoring full access to the internet and telecommunications. Mr. Lawrence highlighted the strain on hospitals, including reports of child casualties, and warned of expedited judicial processes that could see protesters face the death penalty. He stressed that the cycle of violence must end and that the Iranian people's legitimate demands for fairness, equality, and justice must be heard.
We are horrified by the mounting violence directed by security forces at protesters across Iran, as reports indicate hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested. The killing of peaceful demonstrators must stop. The labelling of protesters as terrorists to justify violence against them is unacceptable. We urge the Iranian authorities to halt immediately all forms of violence and repression against peaceful protesters and to restore full access to the internet and telecommunications services. As we saw most recently in 2022, broad sections of the Iranian population have taken to the streets, demanding fundamental changes in the governance of their country. And once again, the authorities' reaction is to inflict brutal force to repress legitimate demands for change. This cycle of horrific violence cannot continue. The Iranian people and their demands for fairness, equality, and justice must be heard. All killings, violence against protesters, and other human rights violations must be investigated in line with international human rights norms and standards, and those responsible held to account. Several hospitals are reportedly overwhelmed by the number of casualties, including children. Nationwide internet and telecommunication shutdowns are one of the main challenges to full verification. There are reports indicating...
Well, it's crunch time in Washington today as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance hosts the Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers, joined by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the White House. The focus of these high-stakes talks, the future of Greenland, the world's largest island and a strategically critical territory. The meeting follows President Donald Trump's repeated insistence that the United States must have Greenland for national security and to counter Russian and Chinese influence. Comments that have alarmed Copenhagen and Nuuk. In Copenhagen this week, Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen and Denmark's leader made a unified appeal that Greenland is not for sale, and if it must choose, the island will remain part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Officials from both governments have stressed a desire to address security concerns through cooperation, not through changes to sovereignty, even as European leaders expressed strong support for Greenland's territorial status ahead of today's talks. As tensions over Greenland continue to ripple through international capitals, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has weighed in, saying that the island can count on the EU as the US and Denmark navigate a high-stakes dispute. Speaking in Brussels on Wednesday, Ms. von der Leyen emphasized that Greenland belongs to its people and that the decisions about the territory rest solely with Greenland and Denmark. She also reminded audiences that the island is part of NATO, signaling support for its current status. Her message comes ahead of high-level talks at the White House. She stresses that Greenlanders should see support not just in words but in deeds, underscoring Europe's commitment to respecting their wishes and interests amid the ongoing international spotlight.
Greenland belongs to its people. So it's up to Denmark and Greenland, and only to them, to decide on matters that are concerning Denmark and Greenland. That's point number one, and that's very important. We are in constant contact with the Danish government, also to listen to what the needs are, what the needs of the Greenlanders are, in very close contact. Second, Greenland is part of NATO. And when we are speaking about Arctic security, this is one of the core topics of NATO, and we know that the glue between the allies is the fact that there's always the clear motto, one for all for one. So NATO is one forum to integrate the different interests that are out there. But of course, the Arctic and Arctic security is also a matter for the European Union without any question. And we've invested since years in our relationship with Greenland. I was there last year, before all this happened, to open the office in Nuuk so that we have a constant channel of communication with the Greenlanders. We have an investment program. We've stepped up our engagement since last year. We have accelerated our work. So there's a strong and good and existing relationship between the European Union and the Greenlanders. And for me, it's important that the Greenlanders know, and they know this by the deeds, not only by the words, that we respect the wishes of the Greenlanders and their interests, and that they can count on us.
Like we mentioned earlier, European ministers are in Washington for urgent discussions surrounding the fate of Greenland amid U.S. President Donald Trump's continued push to acquire the territory. Denmark's foreign minister will meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance today. That follows a visit by Germany's foreign minister with Rubio earlier in the week. Let's get more from DW correspondent Stephen Beardsley from Berlin. Stephen, great to see you today. What can we expect from the meetings today?
That's right. Involved in this meeting are on the Danish and the Greenlandic side, their foreign ministers, also the foreign minister, the Secretary of State of the U.S., Marco Rubio, but also Vice President J.D. Vance, and that could make things interesting. Now, what we're expecting from the Danish and Greenlandic side is what we've been hearing to this point, which is it's in Greenland's right to express its own intent, to exercise its own sovereignty, essentially. And that is a message that also the German Foreign Minister, Johann Vadeful, brought when he talked with Marco Rubio earlier this week. If the meeting lasts long enough, if it's taking a constructive turn, then there could even be discussion about NATO involvement in Greenland, about the involvement of European states in terms of Arctic security, what they could do to reassure the U.S. The real question is what they're going to meet on the American side. Now, this was planned as a meeting with Marco Rubio on the foreign minister level, but then J.D. Vance said that he wanted to join, and now he's hosting the meeting. And we know that Marco Rubio has tended to portray much more of a moderate stance on this issue. Again, Johann Vadeful, when he met with Rubio, coming out of that meeting saying that he was reassured on the Greenland issue. But J.D. Vance, of course, brings a much more Trumpian hard line, and that's going to be the question: is what's going to happen when J.D. Vance is there? Could there even be a press availability, which also brings other certain dangers when Vance is there? So I think we're going to have to ask that question of what's going to happen with the Americans here.
Perhaps another question is, what's at stake for Europe in these discussions?
When you look at the past year, you could say this is a relationship between the EU and the U.S., or Europe in general and the U.S., that really has eroded. When you look at the tariffs that the U.S. has implemented in Europe, when you look at the way that the U.S. has talked about Europe and its laws and its domestic policies, something that U.S. presidents before have usually stayed out of. And when you look at the recently released national security strategy, that was just a few months ago, in which it warned that Europe was facing what it called civilizational erasure due to its migration policies, all of those highly offensive for Europe. But what's happening with Greenland is something that could be explosive, and that's everything. That's what we're hearing from every minister, from every head of state that we're talking to, is that this is something that really puts NATO itself on thin ice. And of course, NATO is incredibly important for Europe. The U.S. in particular, bringing certain strategic weaponry, certain strategic kinds of capabilities that Europe frankly doesn't have. That's important as you have a rearmed Russia on the continent. And so that's why it's really important that NATO stay as it is. Another issue here is Europe and how much sway it has in the foreign affairs arena. That is a question that's being asked more and more here as these issues come up. Look also at Iran right now and the protests going on there. You have a U.S. administration that's talking openly about intervening there, and the EU, Europe, basically feels like they're observers to this point.
And Stephen, with what you've seen so far, is there a way out of the current situation that doesn't damage the relationship between the U.S. and Europe?
It's clear that this relationship has been damaged under the Trump administration. The question is if it's going to explode with something happening to NATO. Now, I spoke last week with the Greenlandic Minister of Mining. That's Naya Nathanielsen. She's part of the coalition, the governing coalition. And we talked about a range of issues from mineral resources in the territory to everything going on right now. Of course, she said, look, there is room for collaboration. There's room for something constructive. We can do things. We can talk with them. We see ourselves as being in the sphere of U.S. interests. That's very clear. We want to act in that way. We're taking measures to exclude investment from Russia and from China. However, she said, what we don't have is respect. We're not treated with respect from the U.S., and that makes it hard for us to do anything. So I think that's what's expected from the Greenlandic and the Danish side here. The question is really how the U.S. wants to play this, if this is going to be a very bombastic approach from Trump, and if that's going to be carried through into this meeting. That's, I think, something that we're going to find out on Wednesday.
Stephen, thanks again. And when we come back on the program, global sculptors transform China's Changchun into winter wonderland. We'll bring you details of that and other stories in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S. Department of State has directed consular officers to pause visa processing for Nigeria, Russia, and at least 73 other countries from January 21 as Washington moves to tighten immigration screening over concerns on welfare dependents. Under the instruction, visa officers are to refuse applications using existing provisions of U.S. immigration law while the review is ongoing. The pause applies across multiple visa categories and will remain in force indefinitely until the reassessment is completed. The countries affected span Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Some of the affected countries are Somalia, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, Brazil, and Thailand. Speaking of Thailand, this tragedy in the northeastern part of the country where at least 32 people have died and 66 others injured after a construction crane fell onto a moving train. The crane derails the train, crushing several carriages, and one of the carriages caught fire. Among the injured are a 1-year-old child and an 85-year-old, with 7 people reported in critical condition. Authorities say there were 171 passengers on board when the accident occurred around 9 a.m. local time. The State Railway of Thailand has launched an investigation and says it will take legal action against the construction company responsible. The company, Italian Thai Development Public Company Limited, expressed regret and promised compensation and support for victims and their families. Officials say this incident is one of the deadliest railway accidents in recent Thai history, and authorities are continuing rescue and recovery operations. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has again called for equitable climate finance and robust capacity building for developing countries that will help them support true climate commitments without losing focus on advancing their development and priorities. The president made this advocacy while delivering a keynote address on the first day of the ongoing Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week in the United Arab Emirates. He also announced that Nigeria has concluded a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the UAE to deepen trade and cooperation in renewable energy, infrastructure, logistics, and digital trade. Our State House correspondent, Larry Lasisi, reports.
It is the opening ceremony of the 2026 Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. The President of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, leads an audience made up of heads of states, ministers, business leaders, and others. The Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates gives the opening speech, highlighting the undeniable union between artificial intelligence and energy for the next era of human progress.
Artificial intelligence is rewiring every industry, reshaping every sector, and resetting expectations for global growth. And while the world is changing around us, one constant remains, and that is energy. There is no artificial intelligence without actual energy.
Next is the award ceremony for the Zayed Sustainability Prize, which sees several winners emerge.
Let's hear it for our winner, NNE. Let's hear it for Base Foundation.
The opening ceremony is followed by the first session of the summit, which featured President Bola Tinubu delivering his keynote address.
Underscores the urgency.
He says the summit is an opportunity to align climate action with energy access, economic growth, job creation, and social inclusion.
The foundation of every modern economy is electricity. As an emerging economy in the global south, we understand the delicate balance between industrialization and decarbonization, so that one is not pursued at the expense of the other. We are calling for a fundamental shift in global financial architecture, a move away from the restrictive requirement of sovereign guarantees, which unfairly penalize developing countries.
He also informed the gathering that Nigeria has concluded a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the UAE to deepen trade and cooperation in renewable energy, infrastructure, logistics, and digital trade.
The agreement will deepen trade, unlock sustainable investments, and strengthen cooperation in renewable energy, aviation, logistics, agriculture, digital trade, and climate-smart infrastructure, creating enduring opportunities for our people and businesses.
The president also announced that Nigeria will co-host Investopia with the United Arab Emirates in Lagos in February 2026, an initiative aimed at attracting global investors and accelerating sustainable investment inflows. The day's session also featured panel discussions as the opening ceremony lays the foundation for cross-sector collaboration and breakthrough solutions. Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
And finally on the program, a winter wonderland is taking center stage in northeastern China as artists from around the world compete in the international ice competition in Shangjun. Massive blocks of ice and compacted snow have been transformed into breathtaking sculptures, capturing the imagination of visitors. Participants say the event is about more than showcasing talent. It's also a chance for cultural exchange and learning. Ji Huilong, one of the sculptors, describes the venue as like a beautiful woman radiating a captivating charm. Artists from both China and abroad are exchanging techniques, forging friendships, and gaining new insights into winter artistry. Ku Jueyi said that it was a rare opportunity to learn from international masters, while Sheng Zongyang highlighted the chance to deepen understanding of ice and snow craftsmanship. Ice Wonderland indeed. Well, that's our show today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Dr. Rogers.